I've been doing some research about Santa Claus and reindeer and things, and so I'm going to bring you up to date on some facts, interesting facts, actually come out from the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. And what they point out is that while both male and female reindeer grow antlers in the summer each year, male reindeer drop their antlers at the beginning of winter, usually late November, early December, somewhere in there. Now, the female reindeer retain their antlers until after they give birth in the spring. Therefore, according to every historical rendition depicting Santa's reindeer, every single one of those reindeer, from Rudolph to Blitzen, had to be a girl. And the source that I found this from also said we should have known. Only women would be able to drag an overweight little man in a red velvet suit all around the world in one night and not get lost. Sorry, fellas. Oh, get over it. I found that to be funny. And actually, it makes sense in metaphysical circles, too, you know, because we say that the intellect is that which refers to the male aspect of consciousness, and that the female aspect of consciousness is the heart. And really, the heart is what, therefore, drives the sleigh. We talk about it also in terms of thinking and feeling, the male and the female. And, of course, we know that both men and women have equal access to both thinking and feeling, the heart as well as the head. But Christmas spirit is really about the heart. And all of Christmas, as you know, is really always an inside job and an inside story. And what's most important is what is happening on the inside of any individual, what's happening at the soul level, what's happening within their heart, and the extent to which a person is really opening to the movement of the spirit that is characterized by something wanting to be birthed in us, as we recognize in an event in history as well. And so this is also a season that is very much about light. And a lot is talked about light. We have lights on Christmas trees and all that, but it's about light in the sense that it's about enlightenment. I think the potential for spiritual enlightenment seems somehow to be stronger as a possibility at this time of the year or in this season. I like to say that there is kind of a river of spirituality that rises up and goes spilling over its banks into people's hearts and minds and souls for those who really are there to receive it. There's just an energy that wants to move through us. And certainly there are dark things that go on in our world. Our news reports it to us on a regular basis. But we must never forget that the light is always greater than the darkness. And the light is what we need to bring to the darkness, always. It's the greater power that can be brought to any kind of problem that's facing us individually or collectively. And this idea of light is spoken of throughout the scriptures, but one significant passage is the one found in the Gospel of John, the first chapter. And it's verse 9 where it says, and talks about the true light that lighteth every man that comes into the world. The true light that lights or lighteth every man, every person coming into the world. I used to read that in another way, where it was the true light that lighteth every man was coming into the world. It's not saying that. It's basically saying every man, person in the world, coming into the world, you and me, has this true light. We have this Christ light. We have this spark of the divine. We have this higher self. We have this eternal I that lives within us and that exists. And that's why Jesus was talking about, I'm the light of the world, you are the light of the world, but don't cover that up. You know, and we tend to cover it up. What is already inherent in us, every person coming into the world comes in with this light. And we cover it up through various experiences and conditionings. And so that reference was preceded by the first line of chapter 1 of the Gospel of John, and that's where it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." And so we have Jesus actually being referred to in sort of two ways in this first chapter. Verse 9, it's saying it's the true light that lights every man that comes into the world. The same light that was in Jesus actually is a light in us. He obviously expressed it fully and completely, was the great example of that light, and said, you know, you have a light within you. And it's a process of a journey of awakening to that light and expressing it more fully. And then you have in verse 14, and actually the first one in the chapter saying, you know, there was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. But verse 14 says, "And the Word became flesh, you know, and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth." So, you know, there are, at Christmas time, you know, it seems a time that things can become brighter with love and compassion and kind of goodness, that people find a place in their heart somehow at this time of year to just reach and dig deeper into the truth of who they are in these various ways. I think it can be helpful to realize too that this time of year, you know, that we celebrate Christmas is significant and has been for a long time this time of year, because even prior to Jesus being born on the planet, the ancients for years and years prior had ceremonies and all kinds of celebrations of the winter solstice in the northern hemisphere. And these celebrations and ceremonies were based on, you know, the rebirth of the sun, S-U-N. In the turn of the year, when the people would look for the return to brighter days, for the days to begin to grow longer again with more light. And there are stories that are reflected in all of religions that are based upon this rebirth of the sun, the return of that sun in brighter days to the earth. And as it being like a kind of coming of a new dawn, the rising of this new sun, S-U-N, which is promised to have to do with the restoration of bringing on warmth and light and spring and summer, which eventually led to harvests. And so I even read somewhere where it was listed 10,000 years ago in Ireland, they believed and celebrated the winter solstice. So it was something that went on for thousands of years prior to Jesus, that particular time. And when the 22nd of December was passed, there was a looking forward to the renewal process of growth and of life. And the ancients celebrated this new life, whether it was the coming of new good or new food and the fruits of the earth, rebirth of the sunlight and warmth, and even the joys of living. It was all kind of meshed together. And it's hinted that the ancients thought of this time as it being rather magical and mystical, considered to be very special, in that there was sort of like a time of a heavenly outpouring around that time. And basically, I feel like this translates a bit into the idea that this time of year also is significant in that we celebrate the birth of Christ at this time, in which the Son, S-O-N, the Son of God idea, which coincides with the birth of the heavens and the planets and the lengthening of the light of the day, that was celebrated for so long. And that simply, as they taught and believed that the light of the sun, S-U-N, exerted an influence on the advancement of life, on the advancement of vegetation and things like that, so too the birth of Jesus Christ is the idea of a light coming into the world that is advancing an enlightenment into the world. You know, that we are the seeds of God that has been planted here, and Christ's teachings is analogous to sort of like the light, which is the rays of God coming forth through the teachings of His truth. And as they're lived, we become more a being of light and the radiance of God ourselves. And so there are those who feel that there is an even stronger influence that is somehow exerted at this time of year within the spirit of man, the soul of man, that there is nearly in all people this outpouring of the Spirit. It varies in degrees as to, individuals who free it up in them. But as we look around and as we experience Christmas at this time, it seems like oftentimes there are all kinds of indications where people are just being more loving, more compassionate, more helpful, serving one another, just more goodwill is going on. But what we're saying is that there are two very important things we are celebrating at this time, and the first thing is the birthday of Jesus, the event, the historical event where he was born physically into the world. But secondly, we celebrate the birth or rebirth of this universal Christ Spirit that's in all of us. It was referred to as the light that comes into every person, you see. And it's very important as part of our spiritual evolution that we understand that we have that inherent in all of us. And that's why sometimes we speak of Jesus as our elder brother. Granted, we don't say we are currently expressing at the level of Jesus Christ, but he kept calling us to it, saying things like, the things that I do, you can do also, and even greater things than these if you'll just get around to believing it and recognizing it and inviting the one presence and power to move through you powerfully as well. And so it's said that there is a great spiritual dispensation which comes to mankind at this time. Some really believe this, where one can receive in fuller measure this spiritual light or enlightenment, if you will, that is a stimulation of the spiritual forces that move a person forward, open their heart in a way in which they feel energies of connectedness to humanity, to life, to each other, to family, beyond, in ways that they don't ordinarily feel. And that is often experienced and expressed by many a person in this season. And of course, as we do that, it affects a collective mass of humanity because we're really enmeshed together as one. And so there is this spiritual birth that can take place in the heart of humanity. And just as we know the ancients celebrated and had ceremonies around the sun, S-U-N, and the length of the light, so too are we really embracing the idea that there is a light that dwells within us. And as we come into the Christmas season and celebrate the historical event of the birth of Jesus Christ, we're at the same time honoring that Christ and that being we call Jesus Christ by really recognizing what it is that he taught about that light. Sometimes we're called to be an instrument through which the unseen source expresses, where things are placed in front of us or around us in our world and given us an opportunity to take action in some way to provide what may be needed, to be the hands, the eyes, the legs, the whatever of the divine. I love a story that I came across about a person they tell on themselves, actually, a true story. This person was a lady. She was visiting Washington, D.C. in December, about mid-December, around Christmas time. She lived in California, but she was there as a tourist, and she was looking around Washington, D.C., and it was very, very cold that particular year that she was there, and she wasn't prepared for that coming from California, and so she, in her touring around, scurried into Union Station for a bit to get warm. And she sat down there on one of the public benches, got a cup of coffee, and she was ready to do some serious people watching. And she looked up and noticed that there was a homeless man seated nearby. And there also was in this, there was kind of like a hall in which it had bench seats that she was on, and then they had certain tables where people were eating because there was a food court right there, and so people would get food, and there was all this going on around them. And so these people were eating, and the aromas, she needed to notice the aromas were being picked up not only by her, but by this homeless guy. And she wondered how long it had been since he had eaten. And she expected that he would probably approach her for a handout, and she would welcome it, but it didn't happen. And she said that she was kind of, she took on this scene of what was happening. She said there was like a battle going on in her head and in her heart between the two. One was telling her to mind her own business, and the other was telling her and urging her to get up and go to the food court and get something for this homeless person. And while this debate was going on internally within her, there was a young couple that all of a sudden approached the man, and they said, "Excuse me, sir, my wife and I just finished eating, and our appetite wasn't as big as we thought." And so we hate to waste good food. Can you help us out and put this to good use? And they gave him a large styrofoam container overflowing with various food. And the homeless man said, "God bless you both and Merry Christmas," and received it. And then the man and the couple walked off, and she watched as the man kind of scrutinized what he had been given. And very slowly he opened everything, and he had hot soup, and there were crackers, and there was a club sandwich and a salad. And he slowly took the lid off the soup and kind of inhaling the aroma. And he unwrapped the plastic spoon, and he filled the spoon full and was bringing it to his mouth, and all of a sudden stopped. He had suddenly noticed there was another homeless man, elderly, probably in his 70s, shuffling on into the hall. He had no hat, he had no gloves, he had lightweight pants, a light jacket, just a sad sight, very, very cold. And so the first thing that this first homeless man did was quickly lay aside the food and jump up and went to the man and guided him over to his a seat next to him. And he took the old man's hands and he started rubbing them in his own, trying to warm his hands because he had no gloves on. He tenderly took his down jacket off and draped it around this homeless man's shoulders. And finally he said to him, "My name is Jack, and one of God's angels just brought me this meal. I had just finished eating, and I hate to waste good food, so you can help me out." And so he placed the cup of soup and the food there in front of him, and this homeless person said, "Thank you, but only if you go halfway with me on the sandwich. It's too much for a man of my age." And so the woman is observing all of this, and it is moving her. And she's being so touched. And she said, "It wasn't easy making my way to the food court with tears blurring my vision. And I soon returned with the largest containers of hot coffee and a big assortment of food and goodies." And she approached them and said, "Excuse me, gentlemen, but could you take this off my hands?" And went into the same kind of commentary that she had heard the others that had been the great example to her. And she wrote in this article about herself, she said, "My parents, like yours, taught me to share. But it wasn't until that day in Union Station that I truly learned the meaning of that word. She said, I left the hall feeling warmer than I had ever thought possible." And so after this debate and this battle, if you want to call it, that went on between her head and her heart, finally the heart won out. We perhaps have had that debate go on in us, and I share this because this is not the time for a debate. This is the time to go to your heart. Your heart is what really flies the sled of Christmas and extends the gifts to the world. The heart will always serve you. It's what it's about, and it brings light and warmth from the heart to others. There was something I came across that President Calvin Coolidge said about Christmas. And what he said was, Christmas is not a time or a season. He said, it is a state of mind. He said, to cherish peace and goodwill, to be plenteous in mercy, is to have a real spirit of Christmas. To cherish peace and goodwill and be plenteous in mercy, compassion. That's the real spirit of Christmas. The mystics and the enlightened have told us that as we spiritually evolve, we will come to understand and grasp as we move through this world the idea that I am you and you are me. That you really get that more than ever as you continue your journey of your own spiritual awakening. You just awaken to the fact that everyone is you and you are everyone. That there is this incredible connection that and this is a time for that opening, of the heart, and to feel that connectedness and to respond instinctively in that desire to perhaps help others or to help others feel happy and relieve their burdens to whatever extent we can play a part. That essentially we are all really woven together. And it just seems at Christmas time that happens. You see stories of, football players buying bikes, and of charities and organizations doing all kinds of things, and our own congregation taking hundreds of gift tags for the Salvation Army so that children and people who are less fortunate will have a Christmas. And it's that kind of thing that you're responding to that is so beautiful. I think as adults, we tend to have fond memories of Christmases from our past, particularly those that we remember that were really good Christmases, that had a lot of good feelings in them, and that we remember. And the tendency is that we want to duplicate that. We want to have that again and again. We want to feel that level and return to some kind of experience that was similar to perhaps our best Christmases, when we felt really connected and we felt a lot of love and there was a lot of excitement. There was some magic in the air somehow, and perhaps it's to feel again what it is that we even felt as a child in our best moments of that. And it seems like sometimes as an adult, over a series of Christmases, we can become, to some extent, distant or hardened, in regard to Christmas. We can feel like, it's too much about the outer, or that it can be like a burden for some, that has something that it's like Christmas is something you put on your back, that you have to do all this and that to be able to make sure that family or the kids or the relatives or everyone is really going to be happy and have a great Christmas. And we put stresses on ourselves, and there's so many things to do, and there is a lot to do. And so we can get ourselves into some kind of a buzz about that, and we have to be careful. You really can't go back to the Christmases of old, but you can carry forward the feelings that you remember and recall. Every Christmas really is a new creation. As President Coolidge said, it's a state of mind, but I add it's a state of heart too. And sometimes if we can't get into the Christmas spirit, I think it can be sometimes because we may be even possibly focused on ourselves too much. Sometimes I've seen people sink into kind of what I call a full court press about how Christmas isn't going to be the same. It's not going to be good for some reason. Maybe they can't celebrate it where they want to be celebrating it. Maybe they can't be with who they want to be with to celebrate it. Various things like that. And we can talk ourselves into a lousy Christmas simply because certain outer factors aren't fitting together. And we have to move beyond that. That's not what the Christmas spirit is about. It's really recognizing something that's holy and sacred, that's wanting to move inside of you wherever you seem to be placed. And find yourself on Christmas, you can allow it to flow and to be felt. It's only our mind that stands in the way and blocks the door of Christmas to come pouring and streaming on in. There's another story I came across that speaks to this idea. There's a woman who was in her 30s. She had a couple of children, married, and was very bitter and disheartened because her parents, after 36 years of marriage, were getting a divorce. And she could not accept their decision to part. And she became very depressed. It was around Christmas time. This was going on. She was not realizing that they needed her love and understanding at that time more than anything. But her thoughts were constantly filled with, childhood memories of Christmases in the past and the love that they had shared as a family. And when she thought about those moments, she'd burst into tears. And she thought, she would never feel the Christmas spirit again. And anyway, she was about two days before Christmas, and she needed to go to the store to get some ribbon and some wrapping paper, and so she went, and it was very crowded, and there were a lot of pushing and shoving. There was a lot of boxes and things of lights, kind of strewn on the floor, half out of the box. It was like close to Christmas, and people, were just throwing things back on that they didn't buy. And she even her cart had to steer around a little nativity scene that had fallen to the floor. And she stopped and picked it up, put it on the shelf, went on to another aisle. And she saw that the checkout line was so long, she decided she would leave the store. And just about the time she thought of that, she heard this loud voice cry out, "Sarah, Sarah, you get that thing out of your mouth right now." It was some mother yelling at her child in the aisle, one aisle over. And the little girl's voice said, "But Mommy, I wasn't putting it in my mouth. See, Mommy, I was kissing it. It's a little baby Jesus." She said, "Well, I don't care. You put it down right now. You hear me?" And the child insisted, "But it's all broken. It's broken from the manger, and it's broken off." The mother said, "I told you to put that thing down." And so, again, the little girl is asking, can't we buy this baby Jesus? You know, we can't have a Christmas tree this year, you said, and it's broken. It's probably cheap and inexpensive, and please, please. And then there was all of a sudden silence, nothing. And so this woman in the next aisle was a little bit concerned, and she maneuvered around to the aisle to look down and see what was happening. And she saw a mother and a little child that was about 4 or 5, both ragged attire, obviously in limited conditions. And the mother was kneeling on the floor, and she was just holding her child and kind of trembling and trying to get to the place where she could say something to the child. But all that came out was kind of a desperate sob, crying. And the little girl seemed to understand the mother's despair, and she said, "Mommy, don't cry. I'm sorry I wasn't good. I promise I won't ask for nothing else. I'll put the baby Jesus back in the manger. Please don't cry." And the mother finally said, "I'm sorry too, honey, but you know, I don't have enough money to buy anything extra right now, and I'm crying because I wished that I did." And the little girl said, "You know what, Mommy, I really don't need the little baby Jesus doll anyhow, because my Sunday school teacher says baby Jesus really lives in your heart." And at that moment, it was as though the whole cosmos said that line to her. It was like a jolt, you know, that Jesus lives in your heart. And this lady, who was so afraid that she wouldn't have Christmas, right there began to pray and move with such thankfulness to God for the wonderful childhood memories that she had had, for parents who had provided a home, for parents who had given her the love that she needed in the years that were important in her life, and all the different things that she was being thankful for. And she, in the next moments, she grabbed the nativity scene and went to the checkout counter and paid for it, and somehow got the clerk to get the baby Jesus that had broken away from the manger to the little girl